I'll just start by reminding everyone that Congress has taken steps to pass major legislation that is or could be life-changing and game-changing for the economy, for people's lives, and for outcomes for people throughout their lifetimes. This is a proposal that President Biden initially proposed that is now in the hands of Congress to make changes to and pass. And they took the first step, and now they are working on writing it. And I'll come back to that a little bit later. So we know that we can improve the lives of Mainers, and we can create a stronger, fairer economy that expands opportunity for people of every race, every background, not just people and companies at the top who've benefited from the current structure for so many years. And for a long time, we've known that people are living on the edge, too many families having trouble making ends meet. In 2018, before the pandemic, there was a poll that showed that nearly half of all Mainers could not afford an unexpected $400 expense. So if something happened where they would need $400, like a car repair, some said they'd have to borrow the money or sell something to pay that bill. And others said they would have no way to pay it at all. COVID certainly made that even more real. Millions of people lost jobs. Parents, largely women, had to leave jobs to care for children or handle remote schooling. And while at the same time, certain workers that are on the front lines of healthcare and essential systems like food and supply chains have had to continue to go to work in the midst of a public health crisis. And people have suffered throughout the last year and a half, no question about it, truly suffered with lives lost and health and income and more. But we also learned that the government does have tools that can reduce that suffering, because we saw that an expanded unemployment system, new paid leave policies, an expanded child tax credit, and direct payments of cash, among many other policies that were passed over the last year plus, have been able to help people make ends meet, and fewer children are living in fewer children are living in poverty because of those policies. So we know what's possible. We know that government action and laws can change lives. And that's what the Build Back Better proposal is all about. So it is comprehensive. I hope at this point people have heard at least about pieces of it, but it includes many things that we at MECEP certainly care about, that many of you all care about, including climate, clean energy, and clean water funding and investment, expansion of existing health programs to improve affordability and coverage, including Medicaid, Medicare, and the Affordable Care Act, expanding access to affordable higher education, housing vouchers, and investing in affordable housing. And then the area that we're going to focus on today that will include supports for families and kids. And Arthur is specifically going to talk about paid family and medical leave, free or affordable daycare, free universal pre-kindergarten programs, and the expanded and refundable tax credit. So I'm going to turn to Arthur in a minute. And there's more in the package, dozens and dozens of efforts to try and put investments into places where we have underinvested over periods of years, and also to make changes for families. So these were some of the highlights. There is even more. The other piece of it, though, is the elements of the bill that would pay for it. This certainly is a significant amount of money that the federal government intends to spend. I will note that $3.5 trillion figure is a 10-year figure, but it is significant. And it's also possible. And one thing that's important to remember is that the size and therefore the impact of these proposals and investments will only be as big as can be paid for, but they can be paid for by raising taxes on corporations and people who are earning more than $400,000 a year. And one way to think about this in its entirety is really that these are the things that progressives have been fighting for decades. Very briefly, I will also mention, although we're not going to spend a ton of time on it, that there is a sort of hard infrastructure package that is also making its way through, and we'll have a vote later this month. That it also includes many important infrastructure, roads, bridges, pieces that are also important. We are focusing today on the Build Back Better package that is more focused on the economy and supports for workers and families and children. So now I'm going to turn it over to Arthur to dive into some more detail, and then you'll hear from me again in a few minutes.
Great. Thank you so much, Megan and Garrett, and thanks to everyone for being here today. So as Megan and Garrett have said, the Build Back Better agenda proposes the biggest expansion of the social safety net for working families in generations. Among many other goals, if Build Back Better were passed, it would provide vital supports to families throughout every child's life. And so I want to take a moment to focus on 4 pillars of the legislation that would transform early childhood and dramatically reduce child poverty. The first is paid family and medical leave. The second is free or affordable daycare. The third is free universal pre-K for 3- and 4-year-olds. And the last is the expanded child tax credit. So jumping into the paid family and medical leave, the current proposal in the House Ways and Means Committee calls for 12 weeks of paid family and medical leave to care for a newborn or adopted child, deal with a serious illness, or to care for an ailing family member. Now, the lowest wage earners would receive up to 85% of their income over this period, the 12-week period. And as income rises, the percentage of that income that would be reimbursed through this program declines. So I won't go through the breakdown of those steps in income and percentages as they're currently proposed, but to take one example, under the current proposal, someone who earns $50,000 a year currently receives a pre-tax paycheck of about $960 per week. That's before taxes or any other deductions. Now, if they had to care for a sick parent or a newborn child, under this proposal, they would receive nearly $700 a week, or about 72% of their normal paycheck for 12 weeks. It's important also to note that the current proposal would cover non-traditional, part-time, and self-employed workers, which reflects the changing nature of work for so many of us. And we want to really emphasize that obviously it would be a huge boost to folks in those circumstances to have that economic security, but researchers have found that the benefits of paid family and medical leave are immense. So firstly, the health of, early childhood development improvements. There's more time and less stressful time for parents with their newborn. There's an impact on gender balance in the home and the workforce. More men would take time to care for their children and sick family, and it would allow more women to stay in the workforce. It actually benefits businesses by improving retention and productivity of workers, and it rewards businesses that have done the right thing already and provided these benefits, and raises the floor so that all workers have access to this benefit. It also actually increases economic growth by boosting labor force participation, as fewer workers have to drop out of their jobs to deal with these kinds of events. Now, under current law in Maine, there is no paid family and medical leave. And based on a MECEP Commission survey from September 2019, 39% of private sector workers had no paid family and medical leave at all. About 2 out of every 3 private sector workers had less than 12 weeks of paid family and medical leave, meaning that the overwhelming majority of workers in Maine would benefit immensely if this bill were passed. And we should also note that workers of color are even less likely to have access to paid family and medical leave through their jobs. So this proposal also represents an important step toward equity for workers of color. Now, the second piece we want to touch on is free or affordable daycare. The program that has been laid out so far would cover very early childhood, infants through the age of 2. And in a moment, I'll get to the coverage for children aged 3 and 4. Now, the proposal for this plan is still taking shape, but one proposal put forward by Senator Elizabeth Warren and others, which is similar to what's outlined by the Biden administration, would make daycare for young children free for families earning up to 200% of the poverty line, which is, for example, about $44,000 for a family of 3. Now, for middle-class families who make more than that, they would pay no more than 7% of their income on childcare. In Maine, about 60% of children under the age of 3 would receive free or reduced cost childcare, which would be a huge benefit to young families. And as many of us know, childcare is expensive. The median cost for toddler care in Maine is currently about $12,000 per year per child. So for a middle-class Maine family, this cost will be cut about in half to around $6,000 per year. Lower income families will see larger savings, and all families who earn up to around $170,000 a year will see some benefit. Now, the lack of affordable childcare has a lot of negative consequences in our society. Families have to send their kids to substandard childcare. There's lost productivity for employers due to parents having to miss work and cover for care if they can't afford to send their kids to childcare. There's lost wages, reduced retirement benefits for parents, in particular mothers who have to leave their jobs. And there is importantly a substantial downward pressure on the wages of childcare workers. Now, the third point that I want to briefly touch upon is free universal pre-K for 3 and 4-year-olds. Currently in Maine, we don't have universal pre-K for 4-year-olds. We do have a public pre-K program that covers some children, which is a wonderful benefit. But under this proposal, it would be universal for 3 and 4-year-olds. We estimate that Maine would receive approximately $109 million per year to enable an additional 12,000 Maine children to enroll in pre-K. Now, the last piece that I want to briefly touch upon is the expanded, fully refundable child tax credit. The child tax credit was crafted originally in 1997, and it was set up as a tax liability offset. So since it was set to offset taxes that families owe rather than boosting families' income, it actually didn't benefit the lowest paid families. There have been some small improvements in the law since, but none that match what has happened this year. This has been in the news quite a bit, so many of you may be familiar with this, but the American Rescue Plan, which passed earlier this year, made big changes to the child tax credit. It increased the maximum credit to $3,600 per child up through the age of 5, and to $3,000 for children aged 6 through 17. And it's important to note that previously 17-year-olds were excluded, so that was another big expansion. But the most crucial point is that they made the credit fully refundable, which means that those that are most in need of the benefit will receive the same amount as everyone else, including higher income families. Previously, 27 million children across the US received either no or less than the full benefit because their family income was too low. That included roughly half of all Black and Latino children and half of children who live in rural communities. Now, we have the opportunity to make these huge improvements to the child tax credit permanent. Making permanent the expanded, fully refundable child tax credit would benefit 90% of kids in Maine, nearly 230,000 children. Doing so would reduce child poverty in Maine by about half, lifting 10,000 children out of poverty. And again, the most important point of this is making it fully refundable. That's how families that are most in need of the tax credit can receive the full benefit. And research has shown there are many different benefits to programs like the child tax credit. In one study, individuals who grew up in a low-income families experienced a 17% increase in their adult earnings when their family had been provided a $3,000 annual boost throughout their early childhood. And studies in other countries, as well as in the United States, have found that investments like this help lift children out of poverty through all kinds of ways, direct and indirect. The tax credit can be spent on education and health. It can help pay for housing, recreation, childcare, all of it, which can improve a child's ability to learn. And lastly, an Academy of Sciences study noted that among 10 programs for alleviating poverty, a child allowance like the tax credit would be the single most effective way of alleviating poverty. So in addition to those 4 transformational goals that I've just briefly gone over, which we have sought for decades, the Build Back Better agenda proposes to make 2-year community college tuition free, to lower the cost of prescription drugs, to expand home care for older and disabled Mainers and improve working conditions for their providers, to lower housing costs, and to make major investments in a renewable energy economy while creating many, many good paying union jobs. But again, all of these are massive items that we need to fight for, but which we can only achieve to the extent that we can pay for them. And that means eliminating tax cuts for the wealthy and the most profitable corporations, which have done so well for the past 40 years. So that is my piece, and I'm going to hand it back to Megan to go over where things currently stand and what the calendar looks like going ahead.
Thank you, Arthur. And I am going to, maybe everybody can keep a calendar in their head, but to help us out here, I'm going to just share a slide of a potential timeline. And I will say that that things change. And as we mentioned before, Arthur gave a sense of the direction that we think that these proposals are headed in, or elements of bills that could be continued as they exist now. But the bills are being written over the next week or so, largely in the House, which is holding committee markups on specific sections of the bill. The Senate is also doing writing policy, but their process is going to be a little bit different. So what we expect right now is that, again, into next week, the several committees, more than a dozen in the House, will be taking up their sections of the bill and marking them up, which means sort of finalizing the details. And then they'll be put all together into a single bill, which could happen as early as September 23rd, so a couple weeks away, but more likely the following week, and that the House would vote on the final total package. Then the following week is when we expect the Senate to take it up at this point and vote, probably with a number of amendment votes in between. I don't expect that this will be just one part of one day, but perhaps that whole week or a little bit longer. And then most likely the Senate will have changed what the House voted on, and so the House will vote on it again. So this is a tentative timeline. The bipartisan infrastructure bill is intended to be voted on or around the 27th as well. So so I expect that even though things tend to get dragged out and there's a lot of details to figure out, that there are going to be some pressures to keep it tight. So and then after the House voted again, of course it would be sent to the president for signature if they can get majority votes in both houses. So let's talk about those votes. So we do expect that the Build Back Better package will be passed with Democratic votes in the House and Democratic votes in the Senate, as is the case with pretty much every major piece of legislation. Members of Maine's delegation are very important to the outcome, which therefore means Mainers and you are important to the outcome. So Senator Collins is unlikely to vote for this bill, so she's not a major focus of our advocacy at this time. And Congresswoman Shelley Pingree is very supportive. She is focused on a number of provisions that are her area of interest, particularly around climate, but overall we expect her to be very supportive. So the two individuals that we are focused on are Senator Angus King and Representative Jared Golden. And I'll start with Senator King. So he is part of the 50-member Senate Democratic caucus, and they will need every single vote. Right now, we don't think that he is at real risk of not voting for a final package. We think he is in a good place overall and have actually been particularly encouraged by some proposals that he has made to raise revenue to pay for it, particularly around closing what's called the tax gap in terms of people who are avoiding paying their taxes, and also corporations and those kind of using loopholes to not pay taxes. And even just doing this piece would pay for a particularly significant amount of the bill overall. So we do think he is in a pretty good place, but with the bill still being written, it would be good for him to be thanked and encouraged for that. Again, as we said a couple of times, the size of the proposals are only going to be as big as can be paid for. So these proposals are very important, and it would be great to say thank you to Senator King and also tell him what you care about in the bill, whether that's something that we've talked about today or something else that's on your mind, whether it's climate or housing or healthcare, that are also all critically important. And Garrett has posted in the chat information, but I also have an email form. You can go to his website and write an email. And we also have a number that you can call his DC office directly. We also have another number that I think might go to a couple different offices, so you can try either one of those. So that's Senator King. So in the House, the margin for Democrats is also very narrow in the House, perhaps narrower than a lot of people think it is. It's only 3 votes that the Speaker can afford to lose on any given bill. So she needs nearly every single Democrat in the House as well. And Jared Golden is one of 9 House moderate and conservative Democrats that have kind of positioned themselves to be a potential roadblock on the Build Back Better agenda. Initially, they were saying that the vote on the bipartisan infrastructure bill needed to happen first and not be delayed. And eventually an agreement was reached to get that vote closer to when the Build Back Better agenda would be ready. So, so we do think that he's largely supportive of the elements of the package. His office reached out to us with questions about childcare and some other things. And we do think he's largely supportive of the pieces that would pay for the bill in terms of the tax and revenue side. On the other hand, there will be a lot of pressure to reduce the overall number. But again, as I said, reducing the overall number is really just making a choice. And is your choice to protect tax breaks for the very wealthy and profitable corporations, or is your choice to change the lives of Mainers and people across the country? So he also needs to hear from you. And I also have the information for his office, whether you send an email or make a call after this call to reach out to him directly. And I'll wrap so we can get to some people questions. I see one question right there just about who to go through his office. If you know somebody in either of these offices, in Representative Golden's office or Senator King's office, yes, just give them a call directly if you know their chiefs of staff or if you know them. Some people know them directly, call them directly. But for those who don't, we wanted to have this resource in terms of an email and phone number. And the last thing, well, I'll say two more things. One is that there's a couple of decision points here. There's this immediate term where they are finishing writing the bills over the next week or so. So that is a key time to weigh in. And then there will be a vote in the House and a vote in the Senate. And those are the other two moments where lots and lots of support will really make a difference. The other thing I will say is that corporate lobbyists are gearing up for a multi-million-dollar effort to bring down the bill in its entirety or pieces of it, whether that's pharmaceutical companies or oil companies and many more. This is always what happens. And so all of our delegation and many others are going to be hearing from people with a lot of money and resources about why they should not take this vote, why they should scale back proposals, all the reasons that this isn't possible. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce, many others. So your voice really is important. We hope you will make a call or send an email. But with that, I will kick it back over to Garrett. I guess the last thing I wanted to say is hopefully many of you saw an email from us with some of this information about how to make a call and the key points. And if you are interested in getting that kind of thing from us, let us know and we can certainly add you to our list.
Great, thank you, Megan. Thank you, Arthur. Arthur will invite you to join us on the screen too. And again, folks, if you have questions, feel free to enter them in the Q&A function, or you can raise a hand and we'll happily call on you. And there are some that have come through the chat function, but again, just can't stress enough what this moment means. Anybody who paid attention to last year's election probably can appreciate that we wouldn't even be in this conversation but for what happened in Georgia. I think in the same vein that it was vitally important for all people in that state to get out and vote, I think in the same way it's vitally important for all Mainers to make sure their voices are heard among our delegation, because it is clear that we have critical members in this conversation, in particular in Senator King and in Representative Golden. So can't emphasize enough, and as Megan alluded to, if you have a direct line to those individuals, by all means, please do reach out to them. And at least in Senator King's case, we're very grateful for his leadership on the revenue side of the ledger and in calling out the need to make sure that corporations that currently are making tens of millions and billions of dollars in profits and still not paying taxes because of the way our tax laws are currently structured, that needs to be addressed. And we want to thank him for that, while at the same time encouraging him to stand strong on some of the provisions in particular that Arthur alluded to. So we have, Megan, I think this may come to you. Arthur, certainly feel free to chime in, but from a good friend in the Waterville region, Jim Elkins, if funding will be limited by new tax revenues, does this mean that new programs would be funded proportionately to revenues available, or would some programs not be funded? What's your sense of that, Megan?
I think it's hard to know exactly at this moment. I think that it largely depends on where support is. You know, if people are really clamoring for one thing over another, that those would be more likely to be funded. There may be also things where there are some programs that are made permanent and others are made temporary because as I mentioned, it's a 10-year cost. So they may fund some programs over the full 10 years that are permanent and some for 2 or 3 that then could be renewed. So they do have a lot of tools, but certainly what they're hearing about and what they feel are top priorities and that they need to deliver on are the things that are probably most likely to be funded.
Great. And Arthur, from earlier in the chat, there was a question about between the child tax credit and sort of fixed monthly stipend, which would we choose? I don't know if you have thoughts on that. I certainly am happy to chime in as well, but feel free to.
Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the, as I said earlier, the great benefits of making it fully refundable is that it's accessible to everyone. And an interesting change that happened this year was that it was actually came in the form of a monthly check that people on this call may be receiving right now. So rather than it coming as a lump sum when you file your taxes, now you're actually getting it kind of in a periodic way when you really need that money throughout the year to pay for necessary expenses. So I mean, I don't know if it's about the question of either or. I think they're very similar. But I think the child tax credit, the way that it has been, the way that it was dispersed this year was an incredible improvement and one that we would hope to look forward to permanently.
Yeah, and Kenneth, I will say that that's work we've been doing both at the state and federal level is to try and reinforce the importance of making these payments more reliable and ideally meted out over time over a monthly basis. So I think at the end of the day, if it became effectively a monthly stipend so that you could, you know, as you indicate, close all the loopholes, that's certainly one approach. And to the point about sort of corporate money also being redirected to climate issues, I think this goes back for us, at least, again, to the fundamental point that what will define the scope and breadth of this proposal is not necessarily the imagination of policymakers in terms of how those resources can be utilized, but rather their willingness to step up and ensure that we have a tax system that works for everyone, and that we've secured the resources to do that. So that is definitely where a lot of the wrangling is going to be happening behind closed doors. And as Megan alluded earlier, the corporate lobbyists are certainly going to be out because when you look, the Institute on Taxation and Economic Policy put out a great report not too long ago that spotlights the 400 companies that are making tremendous profits and still not paying any or very limited revenue taxes in this country. We do have opening for anybody if there are any other questions folks want to raise. Certainly happy to entertain those. You can either raise your hand or enter them in the chat function. In terms of where we go from here at the Maine Center for Economic Policy, certainly keep your eyes peeled. We're going to have full page ads in the Bangor Daily and the Portland Press Herald in the coming days, calling on folks to contact members of our legislature of Congress. We've also been in direct contact with those offices. Megan is in that space pretty consistently. We've been lucky that members of the delegation have called on us for data and information about how to support that. And we will continue to engage with our partners and supporters to both generate contacts, but also to continue to educate and inform those conversations. Some of you may have seen our video that we put out recently through our MECEP Action Facebook page that highlights the voices of people who've already been benefiting from the child tax credit. And so there's a variety of different tracks we're working on. There is one question that came up that Arthur has alluded to that I've neglected to speak to, which is the difference between paid family medical leave and home care. And Arthur, do you want to say just a couple of words on that?
Yeah, I mean, the paid family and medical leave program is a 12 currently, as it's currently formulated, as a 12-week program. There's nothing beyond 12 weeks, and it's an opportunity for family to care for their loved ones, whether it be a child or themselves actually, or a family member who's sick. The home care, the investment in home care is for longer term care for folks who are older or disabled. And so that's for folks who might need assistance for a much longer period of time than just that 12-week time for a family member to step away from their jobs and care for themselves or their family. So they are they're serving two different roles. And so I don't see them as an either or. I think they're both really crucial investments in our social infrastructure.
And I also want to respond to one point that Kenneth Capron put in the chat, which is there a way to ask for money without beating up on the rich? I don't think, at least in our approach, that we're interested in beating up on the rich. What we are interested in is calling out the ways in which our current system is skewed. And I think you don't have to look very far. There was actually a report that came out from the US Department of Treasury the other day that identified the fact that the top 1% basically don't pay about 160 billion in owed taxes every year. And there are a variety of ways in which that happens. And I think the point that we're making and that others are making is that if you look at the ways in which the tax code is applied and the ways in which it works, there are plenty of ways in which it has been structured so that people are not paying what reasonably should be owed. I mean, a large corporation that is paying nothing in income taxes while making billions in profits, they're doing it legally in many instances. And I think there are many people who have rightly acknowledged the fact that we need to make sure that we're plugging those holes where they do exist. So we're not necessarily suggesting ill motive or intent on the part of people who are wealthy, but rather indicating that there has been ways in which the tax code works to their advantage, and there are ways that some of those advantages maybe are not necessarily the way most people would agree the tax code should be working. So yes, Megan.
Can I add to that just a bit? So sometimes people have an idea about how if we just strengthen the economy, grow the economy, that everybody will benefit. And I think what the last several decades, many decades now have showed us is it's simply not that simple. That we know that while productivity has gone up, people's incomes in middle and low income people, their incomes have not gone up. And some people have become incredibly wealthy. And one way I think about this, if you think about a pasta maker, if you think about, I don't know, a Play-Doh thing, if you've got young kids like I do, you can put the dough in and it's going to come out the same every time, unless you change the shape of the structure. And so this is a moment where we can fundamentally change some shapes so that the outcomes will truly start to look different.
Yeah, that's a great metaphor, Megan. And the one that comes to mind for me that maybe some folks have heard before is I used to play Monopoly with my brothers, and for some reason I always lost. And then one time I went to a friend's house and started playing, and I played by the rules that my brothers had always told me the game worked. And my friend said, "That's not the way you play." And I said, "What do you mean? That's the rules." They said, "No, it's not. Here's the rule book for the way we play." So I think fundamentally the reality is the rules are structured the way they are currently. And it turns out that the way they're structured may not necessarily be achieving the outcomes we would expect and hope for all people, not just those who are currently benefiting from the ways that it's currently being structured. So with that, I think, again, happy to respond to questions offline that people have. We have recorded this event, so we will, in response to your question, Annette, try to make sure that we make that available. And certainly the links that we've shared are available on our website, and always happy to connect one-on-one with folks and provide additional information and support if you do decide to reach out to members of our delegation. And as always, we're certainly grateful for folks' engagement and interest in these issues. We hope that this series of webinars that we've had over the last year and a half has been helpful in keeping you up to date on issues, but also in supporting your own engagement and ability to connect with others. Megan, Arthur, anything else you'd like to say in closing?
Just if you have time, send an email, make a call. it really, really can make a difference.
Great. Well, with that, I think we will close out, and certainly appreciate everybody joining us today. And we will look forward to connecting again in the future. Thank you, Arthur. Thank you, Megan.